My father told me I had my mother's hands. Soft, small, made for folding laundry and signing permission slips, not for cutting into people's skulls. He said it the first time when I was 9, standing in the doorway of his study while he reviewed resident applications. He didn't look up. He just stood in the doorway of bedroom at 2 in the morning. Tankwitch's Pauv. Their brother has a surgeon's hands. You have your mother's. I'm 31 now. I've performed over 400 craniotomies. I've never once dropped an instrument. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Avery. I grew up in a house where medicine wasn't a career, it was a bloodline. My father is Dr. Roland Sinclair, one of the most decorated neurosurgeons in the country. His name is on a wing of St. Carver Medical Center in Boston. His photograph hangs in the lobby, next to a plaque with a quote he gave at a fundraising gala in 2009. The greatest gift a physician can give is certainty. My brother Chad became a neurosurgeon too. Of course he did. He walked into that identity like a suit that had been tailored for him since birth. My father coached him through his MCAT prep at the kitchen table every Sunday. He flew to Chicago to sit in on Chad's first solo surgery as an attending. He called Chad's department chief personally to make sure his son got the best rotations, the best mentors, the best everything. When I matched into neurosurgery at Hopkins, my father said, "That's a lot of pressure on yourself, Avery. Are you sure you don't want to reconsider something more manageable?" I didn't answer him. I had learned by then that answering him only gave him more to work with. My mother was somewhere between them, not cruel, just absent in the way that certain kinds of cowardice make people absent. She loved my father's approval more than she loved conflict, and conflict was what it would have taken to defend me. So she stayed quiet. She smiled at the right moments. She passed the potatoes. Chad was 4 years older than me and had inherited every ounce of our father's confidence without any of the competence to back it up. He was technically skilled. I won't take that away from him, but he was the kind of surgeon who performed well when everything went according to plan and fell apart quietly when it didn't. He was also the kind of surgeon who made sure credit flowed upward to him and blame flowed downward to everyone else. I had watched him do it for years. I just hadn't realized he'd eventually do it to me. I finished my residency and fellowship at Hopkins, then accepted a position at Mercy General in Baltimore, a top 20 academic medical center with a strong neurosurgery program. I was hired specifically to develop a minimally invasive approach to deep structure resections, something the department had been trying to build out for years. My research from fellowship had gotten attention. A paper I published in the Journal of Neurosurgical Sciences had been cited 47 times in 18 months. My father told me the citation count was probably inflated by self-referencing. I didn't tell him that I'd specifically checked for that. What I also didn't tell him, what I hadn't told anyone outside of Mercy General's research committee, was that over the past 2 years, I had been developing a surgical protocol in collaboration with the hospital's neurotech team. We called it the Ashford Protocol internally, after the corridor in the research wing where we'd had most of our late-night planning sessions. It was a step-by-step approach to navigating certain high-risk tumor resections near the brainstem that reduced average operative time by 31% and, in our pilot data, cut post-operative neurological deficits nearly in half. The committee had been quietly preparing to present it at the National Neurosurgical Symposium in March. Nobody outside the hospital knew the name attached to it yet. Chad had joined the staff at Mercy General 8 months before this story reaches its point of no return. I had not recommended him. I had not been asked. He had applied, interviewed, and been hired because he was genuinely qualified on paper, and because our father had made a phone call to someone on the board he'd gone to medical school with. I found out about the phone call 3 weeks after Chad started. He never mentioned it to me. Neither did my father. What Chad did do within his first 2 months was start positioning himself. He was charming in the way people who have spent their whole lives performing charm become charming, effortless on the surface, transactional underneath. He remembered attendings' names, their spouses' names, which hospital administrator was angling for a promotion, which department head was sensitive about budget meetings. He builds alliances the way a contractor builds scaffolding. Not because the scaffold is the building, but because it gets you to the places that matter. He also started making small, consistent comments about me. Not to my face. He was smarter than that, but in the margins of conversations, at the end of rounds, in the break room, during department mixers where the wine was bad and the politics were real. Things like Avery's always been more of a researcher than a clinician. Or my sister is great, she just sometimes gets in her head during high-pressure situations. Or the one that made its way back to me through a scrub nurse I trusted. Between us, she got that position here partly because the committee felt pressure to balance the gender numbers. That last one I heard on a Tuesday in October. I was scrubbing out after a 6-hour resection, a case everyone in the room had agreed afterward went as well as any of them had ever seen a case that complex go. I was still holding that warmth, that specific satisfaction you carry out of an OR when you know a patient is going to wake up better than they went under. And then my scrub nurse told me what she'd heard, and I stood there in the hallway outside the OR with water still dripping off my hands, and I felt something go very quiet inside me. I did not go find Chad. I did not go find anyone. I went back to my office, closed the door, and sat down at my desk. There is something I learned a long time ago, living in my father's house, that Chad never had to learn because it was never required of him. I learned that if you fight back loudly, you give people evidence of exactly what they already decided to believe about you. You become difficult. You become emotional. You confirm the story. But if you go quiet, not passive, not defeated, but genuinely quiet, you become someone doing the one thing your enemies can't do anything about. You become someone building something. The Ashford Protocol presentation was scheduled for March 15th at the symposium in Washington, D.C. Dr. Helena Marsh, who chaired our research committee and had been one of the most respected figures in academic neurosurgery for 30 years, was going to present it formally to the national audience. My name was on the paper. My data was the backbone of the methodology. But the way these things usually go, the department chief would announce it, the committee chair would present it, and I would be somewhere in the room, credited in a slide, watching other people's names lead the conversation. That had been fine with me. I didn't need the spotlight. I needed the work to matter. What I did not anticipate was Chad. In January, he somehow found out about the protocol. I don't know exactly how. My best guess is a colleague he'd cultivated who sat on a peripheral subcommittee. Whatever the source, he learned enough that there was a major protocol coming out of Mercy General's neurosurgery department, that it was going to the national symposium, and that it would be the most significant research announcement the department had made in a decade. He went to Dr. Wardrew Harrington, our department chief, a man who respected results but was also deeply susceptible to competent-sounding presentations from people who reminded him of himself, and he made a case that he should be more centrally involved in the protocol's rollout. He framed it as wanting to support the department's visibility. He offered to speak at the symposium. He mentioned, apparently, that he had been involved in early conceptual conversations about the research direction. That was a lie. He had not been in a single one of those conversations. He had not contributed one data point, one clinical hour, one revision to the methodology. Dr. Harrington came to me with the idea. He presented it as a suggestion. Wouldn't it be nice to have Chad co-present? The Sinclair name on the paper twice would be powerful optics for the department. I looked at him for a moment. Then I said, "Of course. Whatever you think is best for the department." He seemed slightly surprised that I agreed so easily. He said he'd look into the logistics. I left his office and walked directly to the research wing and found Dr. Marsh at her desk. I closed her office door. I told her everything. Not just about Chad's request, about all of it. The comments he'd been making around the department, the phone call our father had made to get him hired, the 8 months of scaffolding he'd been building. I told her calmly, with specifics, dates, names of the people who had relayed comments to me, the exact language Chad had used as described by witnesses. Dr. Marsh listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Avery, how long have you been sitting on this?" I said. "Since October." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. "And what do you want to happen?" Nothing dramatic, I said. I just need you to know the full picture before March 15th. She held my gaze. Consider me fully informed. That was all we said about it. The symposium was on a Saturday. The room held about 600 people, department heads, research leads, residents on fellowship, journalists who covered the academic medicine beat. It was the kind of room where careers got written or rewritten depending on what happened in the span of an hour. My father was there. Chad had invited him. I found this out when I arrived at the conference center and saw them together in the lobby. My father in a dark suit with the easy authority he carried everywhere, Chad at his elbow looking exactly like what he was, someone who had spent his life trying to reflect that authority back. My father saw me. He nodded. That was it. A nod the way you'd acknowledge someone you recognized from somewhere you couldn't quite place. Chad smiled. Avery, you look tired. Long week? I said. I'm fine, thanks. My mother was not there. She had sent me a text the night before that said, "Good luck tomorrow, honey," with a 4-leaf clover emoji, and I had not responded. The morning session went through its program. There were 4 presentations before ours. Chad was hovering near the front of the room, with the particular nervous energy of someone who has planned to take up space and is waiting for his moment. When the moderator introduced the Mercy General segment, he said it was a landmark presentation from one of the most productive research programs in clinical neurosurgery currently operating in the country. Then Dr. Helena Marsh walked to the podium. She did not introduce Chad. She pulled up the first slide, which had the protocol's name across the top, the Ashford Protocol, and below it, in the author line, exactly one name, mine. I was sitting in the 4th row. I felt the shift in the room before I understood it. A slight reorientation, a few heads turning. I heard my father, 2 rows behind me, make a small sound I couldn't interpret. Dr. Marsh began the presentation. She walked through the methodology with the precision and authority that had made her one of the most cited researchers in her field for 2 decades. She explained the clinical problem, the gap in existing approaches, the 2-year development process. She referenced specific cases from the pilot cohort. She quoted from the data. And then, about 22 minutes in, she paused. She looked out at the room and said, "I want to take a moment to speak directly about the person who built this." The room went very still. In academic medicine, we have a long and uncomfortable history of attribution errors, she said. Work originates with one person. Credit accumulates around another. Often the person doing the building is also the person who has been told at various points in her career that her hands weren't made for this work. I heard my father shift in his seat behind me. Dr. Tanakan, too. Avery Sinclair developed every element of this protocol over 2 years of clinical research, late nights, and a level of methodological rigor that I have rarely seen matched in 30 years of reviewing research. She did not ask for this acknowledgement. She didn't need to. The work speaks completely for itself. Dr. Marsh looked out over the audience. But I am going to say it anyway, clearly, so that it is on record in this room and in every publication that follows. This is her work, not her department's work, not a collaborative effort, hers. She turned from the podium and looked directly at me. "Dr. Sinclair," she said, "would you please come up here?" I don't remember walking to the podium. I remember the floor. I remember the specific sound of 600 people beginning to applaud before I even reached the microphone. I stood next to Dr. Marsh and I looked out at the room, and for a second I couldn't speak. Not from fear, but from the specific sensation of something releasing that has been held very tight for a very long time. I talked for 11 minutes. I hadn't prepared anything formal. I knew the work so completely that I didn't need to. I walked them through 3 specific cases from the pilot cohort. I explained the decision points that had shaped the methodology. I answered 2 questions from the floor without hesitation. When I stepped back from the podium, Dr. Marsh shook my hand. Then she said, quietly, close to my ear, "Give them something to cite." The applause lasted longer than it should have for a methodology presentation. I walked back to my seat. I did not look at my father. I did not look at Chad. But I felt them both the way you feel a draft from a window you've stopped being able to close. It was my father who came to find me during the lunch break, not Chad. He found me in the atrium, standing with a coffee I hadn't drunk. He came alone, which surprised me. He was wearing an expression I had not seen on him before. Not quite remorse, not quite pride, something unresolved sitting between them. He said, "I didn't know the extent of what you'd built," I said. "I know." He seemed to expect more from me. A softening, maybe. An opening. I didn't give him one. "Your mother would have," he started. "Dad," I said. Not unkindly, but clearly. "I've spent a long time waiting for you to see what was right in front of you. I don't need you to see it now because 600 people just made it unavoidable." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry," he said. It was the first time in 31 years I had heard him say that to me. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I thought about the 9-year-old standing in the doorway of his study waiting for him to look up. "I believe you," I said, and then I picked up my coffee and walked back toward the conference room. Because the afternoon session was starting and there were 3 researchers who had come specifically to ask me about replicating the protocol at their institutions, and I had a lot left to say. Chad did not speak to me that day. He left the conference center before the afternoon session ended. He sent me a text that night that said congrats, seriously, and I read it once and set my phone face down on the nightstand. The Ashford protocol was published in Neurosurgery 4 weeks later. It was the cover article. The week after publication, I received a formal offer to become the director of minimally invasive neurosurgical research at Mercy General, a newly created position that came with its own lab, its own budget line, and my name on the door. Dr. Turbos Harrington made the offer himself. He did not mention Chad. He did not mention my father. He spoke about the work and what it meant for the department and where he hoped the research would go. I accepted on the spot. My mother called when the publication came out. She had seen the article shared somewhere online. She said she'd always known, that she'd always believed in me, that she was so proud. I listened. I thanked her. I kept the conversation short. Some doors, once you finally stop holding them open, close very quietly on their own. My father left a voicemail the day the directorship was announced. He said he'd been thinking about what I said in the atrium. He said he'd been thinking about a lot of things. I've listened to it 3 times. I haven't called back yet. I'm not sure if I will soon. But I've stopped feeling like that decision is urgent, which is itself something new. The sense that I am not waiting for his timeline anymore. I am on my own time now. There is a framed copy of the neurosurgery cover page on the wall of my office, not because I need it there, but because some mornings, when the day is long before it's even started, I look at it and I remember the specific feeling of standing at that podium, looking out at 600 people who had just heard my name said the way it had always deserved to be said. And I think about a 9-year-old girl standing in a doorway waiting to be seen. She didn't need softer hands. She needed more time.